And Manu, we are sitting down here in the dead of night here in Europe, just mere moments after Tuesday night's Champions League results. Liverpool, of course, knocked out by PSG, and Barcelona knocked out by Atletico Madrid. And, we wanted to kind of offer our instant reaction to this game because in many ways it felt like two games that highlighted the strengths and also the weaknesses of four of the most notable managers in European football right now.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, Luis Enrique, Arne Slot, right, was a big matchup, and then Hansi Flick and Diego Simeone felt like a really big matchup as well. And I don't know if we get any good answers from both of those games. Whether there's like any wide sweeping conclusions. But what I can maybe offer from having watched both trying to watch both at the same time as much as that's possible, is that we've maybe learned a little bit more from Liverpool PSG than we learned from Atletico versus Barcelona, and that I think that Luis Enrique might be still the best manager in world football, and that Arne Slot might be a little bit in trouble.
Yeah, we were discussing this just before we came on air, and how do you kind of describe this PSG team under Luis Enrique? And I think the best way I can describe them is they just know how to get the job done. And that might sound like a very reductive kind of answer, but for so many years, PSG had all the money, but they didn't know how to kind of turn it into trophies. It's how people would say all the gear, but none of the idea, in terms of like, you could throw money at a problem, but it's not going to solve itself. And it wasn't really until Enrique arrived in Paris that they've turned into this remarkable winning machine. And I think it's quite telling that I wrote an article for Transfermarkt before this match. It'll probably be updated by the time people listen to this episode. But since Luis Enrique played his first Champions League game as a manager, which was, of course, at Barcelona, only two managers have actually averaged more points per game, and that's Carlo Ancelotti, obviously at Real Madrid mostly, and Hansi Flick, who we'll come on to talk about in a moment, but he obviously had a lot of success at Bayern Munich and Barcelona. But, Enrique, and I think the thing that's so startling about those stats is that you look at the guys above him, the guys that he's above, Thomas Tuchel, Julian Nagelsmann, Jurgen Klopp, but perhaps most notably Zinedine Zidane and Pep Guardiola, two Goliaths of the modern game who are considered, well, at least perhaps certainly in Zidane's case, experts in winning European Cups. And I would definitely suggest that maybe we might have to rethink that. And maybe we do have to suggest that maybe Luis Enrique is in fact the expert when it comes to winning Champions Leagues. I know Ancelotti's won more, and Zidane maybe, I don't know, because he's at Real Madrid, kind of has this certain allure to him. But I think, we're maybe sleeping a little bit on Luis Enrique's success as a head coach, and certainly when it comes to the Champions League, Manu.
Yeah, I mean, scored 76 goals in 31 games that he's been in charge in the Champions League since the start of the 2024 Champions League campaign that they obviously won. And they were in a little bit of a slow start then, and they had a little bit of a slow start this year too. But remember too, they reached the Club World Cup final, so they have a lot of games underneath the belt. So it makes sense that they manage their minutes. And yeah, it seems to be working really well for them. I think they're hitting peak form at just the right moment, just as they did last year. Remember, like it was the same story last year. Last year they needed an extra round to get to the Champions League final and win it. I thought today's game was a masterclass. They bent but didn't break. And then, I said this to you in our work chat. When they did score at Anfield, I was like, yeah, that was coming, even though it seemed odd because Liverpool had so much dominance. But you just knew that they were going to get that one break and score, and they did. And then they did it again, and that was that. And it felt right, even though, when you watched the game, you had the sense that Liverpool would score, but like with all the dominance Liverpool had, and I just didn't think they had a chance to score against this team.
Yeah, I think the contrast between the two clubs and the two teams was so apparent, and in a sense it reflects on both of these managers. We talked about how Luis Enrique has turned PSG into this well-oiled machine, and you're right, Liverpool did kind of, dominate, I guess, chances throughout the match, and they kind of huffed and puffed in front, huffed and puffed rather in front of
Yeah.
the PSG goal mouth for much of the game. But where PSG looked, concise and everyone knew what job they were doing, mostly in a defensive role. But then, as you said, Dembele steps up and scores very kind of lovely placed shot. Liverpool looked like a team that had players playing in the wrong positions. They had players playing the wrong roles, whether that's, I was kind of constantly puzzled by the fact that Ryan Gravenberch was the one making the late runs and the late dribbles into the box, even though Szoboszlai and Florian Wirtz are on the team. There's a kind of weird 4-2-2-2 formation to accommodate Ekitike and Alexander Isaac, which is completely different from what they played in the first leg. Frimpong at right back as well always sets off alarm bells in my head, having watched him in Scotland and Germany. He's certainly not a right back. He's certainly not a right back to be playing against PSG at this stage of the Champions League. And then over the course of the game, Slot just made constant changes, and it felt
Yeah.
to me like where Enrique is able to get the best out of his players in the best positions, it felt like Slot was constantly making compromises and constantly trying to push square pegs into round holes in that Liverpool
Mm.
formation. And I think that is kind of the bedrock of the frustration that Liverpool fans have under Arne Slot this season. Obviously, he has a huge amount of goodwill because they won the league in his first campaign, but the way that he routinely in press conferences underlines all the problems that are in that Liverpool team, and then you watch Liverpool and they seem to be completely out of ideas and out of solutions and almost coming up with new problems with the manner in which Slot is constantly chopping and changing that team. It just seemed to me, Manu, like one manager who knew what he was doing and one manager who perhaps didn't.
Yeah.
You know,
No, and I have my, and this might sound really harsh, but I think the team that won the Premier League last year wasn't Arne Slot's team, but Jurgen Klopp's team. Um, and in the moment changes were afoot and it became his team, it really didn't start working anymore. And I think that is something that has to be kept in mind, and also has to be a part of the discussion going forward.